On the podcast today, we're going to speak about chapter 66 of the Tao Te Ching, which makes up the 66th episode of the 81 meditations on the Tao Te Ching. And as usual, Guang will read Jia Fu Feng and Jane English's translation, and I will read Derek Lin's translation.
Why is the sea king of 100 streams? Because it lies below them. Therefore it is the king of 100 streams. If you would guide the people, you must serve with humility. If you would lead them, you must follow behind. In this way, when you rule, the people will not feel oppressed. When you stand before them, they will not feel harmed. The whole world will support you and will not tire of you. Because you do not compete, you will not have competition.
Rivers and oceans can be the kings of 100 valleys because of their goodness and staying low, so they can be the kings of 100 valleys. Thus, if sages wish to be over people, they must speak humbly to them. If they wish to be in front of people, they must place themselves behind them. Thus the sages are positioned above, but the people do not feel burdened. They are positioned in front, but the people do not feel harm. Thus the world is glad to push them forward without resentment, because they do not contend, so the world cannot contend with them. So in this chapter we come back to what is required to be a true leader, and Lao Tzu is speaking about this type of sagely leadership that we've discussed before throughout the Tao Te Ching, because there are many chapters that speak about how to rule humbly. And so this chapter, chapter 66, is speaking about that leadership that a sage has and what is actually required by any leader of the world to rule properly.
Yes. Humility is one of the core essence attribute that we should all have as a Taoist and to study Taoism. And in this chapter, once again, Lao Tzu puts in a context of leadership, right? So how to become a leader with the humility, how to lead people from behind, right? So in chapter 17, actually, there are 4 different types of leaders, and Lao Tzu talks about. So I think in this chapter, what Lao Tzu is speaking of a leadership here is, I think, categorized as we can say maybe highest level of a leadership, which means, like you mentioned, sagely leadership, that only very few people will know about the leaders if there is such a person who is leading the community or a society or something like that. So that means that because the leader is leading from behind, so no one noticed who that person is, or even the idea of there is a leader is a great leadership.
That's right. And in the chapter, it's in relation to that, it speaks about the low place, right? So all of the tributaries run into bigger rivers, which then run into the greater ocean, right? And so the sagely leader is like the ocean or a large river, yes, where all the tributaries run into it, right? And so they are in service to the people. They are not trying to control or govern or rule the people. They are listening to the people, right? And this reminds me of something that Abraham Lincoln once said, like, democracy is a government of the people, by the people, and for the people. Now, in the modern day, particularly in America, people are trying to destroy that type of government that serves the people, because there are governments around the world now, though they may be democratic, that are slowly becoming more socialist or communist without people even noticing, where they rule the people. And it's actually not a government of the people, right? It's a government of the people in the inner circle in the government. And so that would be a complete failure from a Taoist perspective, because the Taoist perspective would be, as Abraham Lincoln's perspective was back in the 1800s, to serve the people, not to control them. The people have the power, right? And so a sagely ruler listens to the people. That's why all the tributaries run into the great ocean, right? They have that vast expanse within them, but they listen and they know what is best for the people by listening to them rather than trying to lord it over them. And so that's a completely different strategy in how modern leaders rule, right? Because modern leaders often want to just rule the people, even in democratic countries. and control them and push certain narratives and so forth and so on. So this, again, in Taoism, we always come back to water metaphors and humility, because as you said, humility is what is required to govern the people authentically. And govern is the wrong word, right? Even rule is the wrong word.
Yes.
Because the sagely leader is in service to the people, because they follow the Tao, because they're in harmony with the Tao, and they are coming from that humble place, so they can see what is best. And the people don't feel threatened because they are like that, right? And so in the modern day, many people look at leaders and they feel threatened by certain leaders because they don't feel as though that leader has maybe their best interests at heart. And look, you can't make everybody happy. I mean, Lao Tzu wouldn't even assume that. But it's just ironic that if we look all around the globe, we see, particularly in this century, a lot of leaders that are not really for the people and by the people.
Yes. Yeah, so if any leaders want to make themselves fearful for people, then that means that, those leaders are like a lack of trust, right? Like, or if at all, really, like, because they don't trust the process of how things work out, or they don't trust their own people, so that they make themselves look like a tyrannical sort of figure, so that makes people to fear them, and that's how they want to control people in the end, right? The reason why the democracy has been, we could say, like most, relatively speaking, most successful political ideology among the others is because of this most naturalistic way of governing society. I think that's what a democratic value is following, as you read what Abraham Lincoln said, and following the natural ways, as we've been talking about, seeking the lower place as a leader, and have that humility intrinsically, just like water. So that does not fear people, rather than bring people together, right? And that's what Taoist value in politics, in leadership, as well as democracy, right? Yes. And when you look at the history, I mean, just recently, like 30 years ago, let's say, when we talk about Soviet Union, Soviet Union was maybe the last, the most recent nation which were very prosperous for some time as a socialist nation, right? But it soon failed for whatever reason. Most of those cases of socialism or communism, the problem is it falls from within, usually. We can see from the good example of how North Korea looks like. Again, we don't know any transparent picture of what's really going on in the country, but we have quite a good idea, right? So it usually fails within, hence the regime collapse, right? Whereas democracies, because people, the citizens, every single individuals have the power, so that brings the natural order to the society. Therefore, it has the most successful and most potential political regime, you could say. But nowadays, funny enough, that because of the social media, people think they all have, place to, raise their voice, and they want to influence other people and whatnot. So it kind of kills that democratic value, because every single individual thinks they are somebody, right? So they want to have some sort of authority or power to control other people or put an influence on other people, the way they think, the way they do things, right? The way they vote or whatnot, and even their sort of rights. So individuals have this illusion of like authoritarian idea that brings a somewhat, you can say, socialistic, communistic regime of thinking from the grassroots in a way, so that people lose sight of what the sacred value of democracy really provides.
That's right. And so you get like echo chambers of people trying to cancel people who don't think the same and so forth and so on. And so, which again, it flies in the face of a democratic value like freedom of speech, for example, right? And, you know, Lao Tzu had to leave a society that had no freedom of speech because his ideas were too counter to what Confucius was speaking about through the Warring States period. Obviously, Lao Tzu is speaking the truth from what the Tao is, and Confucius is speaking about it in the sense that you cultivate it and we need these rules and regulations and so forth and so on. And so we need to abide by these, even though they're my own rules, mind you. So Lao Tzu couldn't take that, obviously. And if we look at Taoism's relationship with the Cultural Revolution in China, that's a big red flag into what a naturalistic path, how that is not tolerated in that type of regime, right? And so, and there's plenty of examples for this. You know, we can speak about Cambodia and, you know, Laos and places like this. So it goes on and on and on. For some reason, people still have a negative opinion of democracy, and, you know, they always have the sort of cultural boogeyman of capitalism and this and that, even though capitalism has risen countries out of abject poverty, which people don't want to talk about because that flies in the face of that type of mentality, whereas socialism and communism usually drives countries into poverty. Hence, China had to create a pseudo-capitalistic culture because they were becoming a third world country. And so these are things that people want, you know, with people who have their head in the sand, they don't want to speak about, right? And so that's, like, to your point, the more naturalistic path of Taoism adapts to democracy because democracy does give people, individuals, that individual responsibility rather than sort of someone tyrannically lording it over you. And unfortunately in the West, because there is this war on the West in the modern day, which is driven by social media companies and, you know, billionaires and so forth and so on, people want to destroy the ability to have individual responsibility and give all the power away to someone else, right? We saw this through COVID where people gave all their power away to big pharma or so forth and so on. Whereas you're an individual, you can still think critically, you can still do what is best for you and your family. That might not be the same as your neighbor or someone down the road, but that's what a naturalistic society is like. You all don't follow each other like sheep to the slaughterhouse. You do as you will and everyone's okay, and you're not sort of put off if someone does something different from you. This is how the world actually was when I was a kid. You know, even in the small community that I was from, everyone sort of thought different, but everyone got along, and everyone really, it wasn't politically charged. See, social media has made the world politically charged, radicalized people, which then these people who are radicalized, they have an inability to listen to other people who have a different point of view. And they don't even know that they have been radicalized. And so when you and I were a child, there was always a negative stigma towards someone who was an extremist or someone who was radicalized. But in this day and age, it is applauded if you are a radical and you are an extremist and so forth and so on, which is very sad, right? And that's, again, if we go back to the Warring States period of China, that's what Lao Tzu had to contend with as well within that time, because the culture was being radicalized by Confucianism. And so older Taoist ideas were kind of like, what are you talking about? Like, we should put this guy in jail. Like, he's talking about these older Taoist ideas when Confucius has laid it all out for us. We should sleep this way, bind our feet. You know, we induce the Tao in the world by following these rules rather than it just being naturally moving through us and naturally in the world, which is, you know, a bit strange when you think about, you know, how someone could come up with that type of idea, right? And so in speaking about that, that's how modern leaders should think about how they lead. They should step away from this eagerness to rule and to be the best ruler, and instead be in service to the people, right? Be in service to the people. And it's even more covert in this modern day and age, right? Because you've got these so-called leaders who have the appearance of being good, but they don't really do good, right? And so just because you appear to do good doesn't mean you're good. And you see this a lot in the modern day, because there's a lot of those leaders in the modern day. And the ones who may not appear to look good but actually do good are the ones who are kind of criticized by these media companies and so forth and so on, right? Which is very ironic. And so people don't actually, it's sad because the way that a lot, particularly Western cultures, the way they've been indoctrinated is they can't actually see who a good leader is because they're basing their opinion on face value, right? And so so those same people in the warring states period of China, they would have based it on face value. Confucius looks clean, well-combed, speaks eloquently, where Lao Tzu's chew on a straw, chucking out swear words here and there, making fun of someone, cynical about where the world is going, but he was very genuine and real. And again, they can't discern the difference, right? They think the one who appears good is the one who actually is doing good. And that's not actually the case. And so you see this a lot in the world, right? Someone might swear or someone might say something funny about someone else and then they say, oh, look, they're a bad person. It's like, first of all, they're only words. It's not like they punch them. And second of all, have a sense of humor. And thirdly, that's actually doesn't really determine if that person is a good person or if they're a good leader or not. It's just that you disagree with their behavior. And so that comes back to the subjective perspective, right? You're disagreeing with these people's behavior based on your type of idealistic vision of how a government should be. And in this chapter, they're explaining how a government should be. Abraham Lincoln explained how a government should be, and Lao Tzu is explaining how a leader should be. Yeah. But for some reason, we've never really took that message on all through history. And if we go through all history, we don't really talk about the good leaders. We talk about these leaders who became tyrannical, psychopaths. And so that's the world that we continually inherit.
Yeah, it's very sad. I don't know, like what you said, for whatever reason, that someone like Confucius came into our history and someone like Darius I came out in the ancient time in the Western, in the Europe. So the acting as if, claiming himself as God, right? So this kind of leadership right in front of people, like not behind the people, it kind of took off, right? So, and they brought out these rules and regulations, and with the Confucianism, how you should dress and how the playing your role sincerely is very important for your spiritual discipline and this and that. And it is true to a certain extent, but not only like what he was trying to push on people, that only created the face value and the saving the face culture, right? Yeah. So saving the face is around the world now became very strong these days, right? How you look, how you dress, how you even speak can be having a big impact on people, and for some reason people judge others based on that. I don't know how, because people's nature or character is not something that you can judge by how they look or how they speak or behave, right? That's pretty absurd. And it's more about, more things become about making you look busy. You look, make yourself look busy, and make yourself look important, and look certain way. Taking over someone who does real work is that we know that the end result. But we all know that. The funny thing is, but that's the way the world is at the moment. So I don't know why people don't point that out. So rather they, like you said, they criticize people who actually do the real work. They might be politically incorrect for a lot of people, but that doesn't mean that person is flawed or anything like that. Right?
And who determines what's politically incorrect?
Exactly.
And to speak to your point about the perception of looking good, that's where social media has come in and absolutely destroyed the psychology of people, because you have this idea of profilicity. So you have this profile where everyone looks good, shiny, and hey, look, this is who I am. It's like, no, that's just a computer screen with your name on it, and some pictures and some words you typed. Who are you truly? And so our generation was, who are you truly? We came from that realm. We didn't even have to ask, because you were already face to face. You already knew the person, right? And so in this modern day, you have the profilicity. So you have this shiny, look, I'm doing good. Look, and, you see, it's pretty cringe, but you see people like feeding the homeless and that, and they're taking pictures like, and you're like, oh my goodness. And they really weren't there out of the goodness of their heart. They were there for clickbait. And so, and people, if you're going to feed the homeless, you're going to do good things, do not put it on social media. Do it out of the kindness of your heart.
That's right.
Like what we do. We don't have to bloody post it. I mean, how ridiculous is that? And so do things out of the goodness of your heart. Don't do it for cheap likes. And it says a lot about someone's character when you're doing that. And so that's the big problem, is that you've got this profilicity where people are projecting an image not of who they truly are. And so unfortunately, that's why the world has changed in a lot of ways, and particularly how they view maybe political people or famous people in general, because they expect that person to do the same as they do. Hey, I project this shiny version of myself, but then oftentimes people who are successful in life are very real. And they are successful because they are real.
That's right.
And so they just put whatever out. Hey, man, this is what I'm interested in. I don't care if you like it or not. I don't even know who you are. It doesn't really matter. So you've got to lean back into what is real, right? And so Taoism is always about being real and not being this fake version of yourself, right? And contributing to a fake world, an increasingly fake world. And so for those who are aspiring to lead out there, you need to get yourself, as this chapter alludes to a higher position spiritually so that you can lead. It's not about, oh, I know all these things about politics, or I know all these things about my job, which makes me the obvious choice as a good leader. And it's like, no, it doesn't. Where are you spiritually within? So the sage is put in that, look, they hardly ever were put in a position of leadership, but if they were put in a position of leadership, it was because they had developed themselves to a certain degree where they could lead the people from behind. They could listen, and they were willing to serve. They felt a great joy and love in serving, rather than ruling or controlling.
That's right.
And so could we say there is one leader in the whole entire world that has that sagely quality? It's debatable, right? Where you have that sagely quality where you want to serve the people and so forth and so on, right? The closest to that would probably be like Modi, right?
Yes.
Would be like Narendra Modi. And so it seems easy, but at the same time, a person has to put the work in to elevate themselves spiritually so that they can listen, and they don't fall for, the carrot.
Yes.
Like a tech company comes along and says, hey, you should do it this way. Here, dangle a carrot, here's some money, bakshish under the table, everyone's well and good. But you don't fall for that.
Yes.
Because you're in service to the people. And see, again, if you have a subjective agenda or a subjective viewpoint, that's again what conflicts with what the people need. And so that's why there are a lot of leaders around the world who neglect their responsibility, because they just want to push their own agenda rather than listening to the collective.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, nowadays, for people who want to become a leader, often have everything, right? Like they might be a wealthy person, and they might have a good reputation, and they might have some successful business they're running, and this and that. But what's really missing, and that is actually the most important thing, which is humility. That's usually like how it seems like nowadays. They have everything but humility. And when we say humility, a lot of people still think of the word in relation to humiliation, right? Like, is humility is really a virtue, or if I be humble, then people might, look down on me and things like that. But actually, that's not at all. As you mentioned earlier, people who become successful usually actually are hardworking people, and they are diligent people. They are humble people, actually. Because in the end, as in this chapter speaks about, that humility is intrinsic in nature, especially in water analogy, we can clearly see what it is, right? So that when we cultivate humility, and to remind you, humility is intrinsic to all of us as well as nature, and we are nature as well, that we also have the humility, but we don't choose to value it, or we think it's not very beneficial, so we don't look to it, right? But humility is intrinsic to us. And once we kind of become purified, we purified our heart and become free from social conditioning, then the humility will shine through from within all of ourselves. And from that place, the true leadership can shine, which is actually, we might not see from a lot of successful people we know, or people who are well known, right? But because they are taking the lower place, they become successful. It's pretty no-brainer. It's not there. These really successful people usually are not the aim to be successful. They're more interested in what they want to create, usually, what they actually want to do, what their passions are, what they want to really do for other people, right? And usually that drives them to become successful. And from that place, in deep down, they have that very humble heart.
That's right. And as you were saying, if they don't have that humility, how can you actually lead properly? Like you can lead like pointing the finger and doing this, and you go this way and that way, and do as I say, not as I do. And so you get a lot of that in the world, right? So where a lot of the cases with humility, not obviously it's not the case in the modern day a lot, but the reason why someone gets to a position of power, let's say in air quotes, is because they have cultivated those virtues in them, or they have realized those virtues in them, and they enhance those and they lean into those. And so then they get into a certain position, not always, right? But there is a metaphysics to this. If you are doing the spiritual work within, the Tao will move through you, and you will bring harmony into the world around you. You don't want to exaggerate this into the entire world, but your immediate world. You'll bring harmony, and you will touch the lives of others in doing so. And so a lot of people just want to lead and want to be a boss, or but they don't have the virtues to be that. You actually have to lean into our natural virtues instead of suppressing them and just aspiring to make money and have leadership and control. You see this a lot with modern gurus, in air quotes, right, where they have this guru complex, where this guru complex is these people have such an eagerness to be in front of people and to control people. Yeah. So to control the way that they think and so forth and so on, right? And so most people can see that, but there are some naive people who can't see that, and then they go down that way with those type of gurus, and then they end up learning the hard way, unfortunately. First and foremost, if a guru doesn't have any humility and they're not in service to the people, then you have to question their actual guru certificate, so to speak. But anyway, like getting back to this, it is important to become that ocean, right? To have that lowly humility, because that's going to be the power that's going to change your life. And inadvertently, you influence other people through not trying to influence them. That's another thing that a lot of people need to think about. It's not that you want to go out there and influence them. You and I laughed about this the other day, this whole influencer thing that people are attracted to on social media and so forth and so on. And it's such a strange term when you think about it, right? Why are you eager to influence anyone? You should inadvertently influence people, like not intentionally.
Yeah, that shouldn't be the final goal.
No, that sounds contrived. That's not very Taoist at all. So, in conclusion on this chapter, I think people need to analyze who are the leaders of the world, right? Do they inherently embody this service to people? Are they operating from the lowly place? Or do they have more subjective agendas and maybe other agendas, related to organizations and this and that are not beneficial for people? And if we all start to think critically, then we can start to really pinpoint who are the real leaders in the world and who aren't. So guys, we hope you enjoyed, and we'll see you guys next time.